All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Shane Guevara. I'm the General Manager of BrushyMtnBeeFarm. Tonight, as in weeks past, I'm going to try and keep this to about 40-45 minutes of what I have to say, and then we'll open it up for questions. In the past, I've done my best to answer all the questions that have been posed. I'm going to have to cut it a little short this evening. I have to scoot out just a little early, but I'll do my best to get to all those questions. We're going to be talking this evening about IPM techniques and going through these. And I'm going to focus. It's well, frankly, fairly difficult to cover, do a thorough covering of the IPM techniques for all the various pests and diseases out there. So I'm going to focus on two that seem to have the most interest, and that being the small hive beetle and the Varroa mite. So those are the two that I'm going to focus in on. But before we get to that point, we need to know what IPM is all about. And I know based on some questions that I had at the last webinar, when I mentioned IPM, some people said, well, what is it? They asked, what is IPM? What exactly does it mean? And this is a definition that I've swiped off of the EPA website. IPM stands for Integrated Pest Management, and basically it's an effective and environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. So what does all that mean? Basically, the long and the short of that is that you work with the biology and behavior of both your host, in this case honeybees, and your pest and or disease to try and mitigate the impact of that pest on your host organism. So, for example, we're going to try and work with the biology and behavior of small hive beetle to lessen its impact on our colonies of honeybees. That's sort of the long and the short. But in order for any integrated pest management technique or approach or management practice to work, you have to have an understanding of both your pest and the host. So, of course, hopefully we've got a pretty good understanding of honeybees. Of course, that's a lifelong learning process. You never completely know everything. Anybody who tells you otherwise, frankly, they're just flat out lying. I'm definitely lumped into that group. By no means do I know everything. By no means am I an expert in this field. They teach me things. Those honeybees teach me things on a daily basis. So it's a lifelong learning process, but you've got to have a basic understanding of your host, the honeybee, and the pests that you're trying to deal with. So before we get into the meat, before I go too much further, I just want to throw up a poll here to get a sense of where people are in terms of their management style. So I'm going to put up a poll here. What is your current management style / philosophy? The first option. Hands off, you just sort of let them do their thing. Maybe you put a super on, maybe you harvest honey. The next one, organic, IPM exclusively, so you're using IPM techniques or organic treatments. The next step would be IPM and pesticides together, so things like checkmite or apistan in conjunction with IPM. And then finally, you're using checkmite and apistan or apelifar or formic acid exclusively. I've got 61% of you voting right now. I'll give you another few seconds here. I've got we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to close that poll. And I'll let people, I'll show you where people stand. Whoops. Hide those. There we go. Whoops. Nope, that was the right button. Sorry, folks. Sort of got carried away there with the buttons. So 6% of you out there are hands off. You let them do their thing. And then it's pretty much split evenly. 51, well, I guess it's a little heavier on the organic IPM. 40% IPM and pesticides together, and 3% pesticides exclusively. Okay, so that gives me a pretty good sense of where folks are, at least historically, in managing their colonies. So let me hide those results, and we'll continue on now with the rest of this. Let me just clear some things out of my way. All right. Now, I mentioned that we're going to focus on small hive beetle and Varroa, but I do want to just mention a couple things here. Again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but Nosema and AFB, that's American foul brood, those always have some questions associated with them. Really, the best sort of IPM approach here is comb rotation for both Nosema and American foul brood, particularly the AFB. Get rid of that old comb that may have spores associated with the wax. And then honeybee healthy, which is a mixture of essential oils and appa herb, which is the same, to help sort of promote a good healthy hive, a good healthy bee. And in both cases, and actually in all cases, any disease, any pest, good quality genetics should never be underestimated. You should be looking for queen breeders that are really doing a good job on selecting for a good, healthy bee. Ones that are looking for disease resistance, hygienic behavior, overwintering, things like that. So good quality genetics should never be underestimated as a way to mitigate disease and pests in your colony. All right, so let's first talk about the small hive beetle. The small hive beetle, in most cases, is opportunistic. In other words, it takes advantage of an otherwise compromised colony. It's a failing colony for one reason or another. Now, that is not to say that you won't see hive beetle in a good, strong colony, because you will. You will see hive beetle in a strong colony, but what happens is that strong colony chases those beetles around and prevents them from ever settling in and creating the mess. Let me get my highlighter. Creating the mess that you're seeing here with these hive beetle larvae. You can see how this honey, capped honey, just has a really, I mean, it's just ugly looking. And in fact, no matter what you do, I mean, look at this mess. It looks like, it just looks nasty. The bees will never clean this up. It will sit there and ferment. What happens is, as the beetle larvae sort of mines through the comb, it exudes this fluid that creates this fermenting, slimy, gelatinous mess. It's really quite disgusting. So they're opportunistic, and a good, strong colony will chase them around and prevent them from sort of settling in and being able to lay eggs, or if they do, that colony will deal with the laid eggs and or associated larvae that hatches from those eggs. So the strong colony will keep them on the run. That is really your best defense against small hive beetle. Now, it's worth mentioning that there are some locations that no matter how strong your colony is, it will have problems with hive beetle, because hive beetle can reproduce on a secondary host, and that secondary host can be composting vegetables like melons and squash. So if you're in an area, I always give the example of a place that's in Georgia. I can't remember the town, but it's right in the heart of cantaloupe and honeydew melon agriculture. And what happens is the farmers take those defective melons and compost them, and that sort of compost pile serves as a secondary host for the hive beetle, and these things can fly miles and miles. So if you've got a colony anywhere near that composting pile of melon, you're going to have a serious problem with hive beetle, whether you've got a strong colony or not. So there are some exceptions to the rule of them being opportunistic, but really they are just opportunistic, and a good, strong colony will help keep them on the run. Now, there are some devices that you can put inside a colony to trap them. As I mentioned in the previous slide, the bees chase the beetles around, and the beetles seek safety by going into tight, dark spots that the bees can't get. And so all of these traps, this is called the West Beetle Trap, this is the Hood Beetle Trap, and this is the AJ Beetle Eater. All of these traps work on the premise that the bees are going to chase the beetles around, and the beetles are going to seek a hiding place where the bees can't go. So, for example, the West Beetle Trap, you can see has this grid that looks much like, I guess, a queen excluder, where there are these little slots. What you do is you fill up a tray, which is right here. This is the tray, and this sort of slotted cover fits on top of it, and you fill up that tray with vegetable oil. The bees chase the beetles. They dive down in through these slots and get into that vegetable oil and drown. Now, there's some problems with this trap. Your hive needs to be almost perfectly level, otherwise you'll get vegetable oil running out the corners or the front or maybe the back of the trap and making a terrible mess. The other thing is that it's fairly difficult to sort of slide this trap in through the entrance of the hive, and then also when you need to clean it, pull it back out of the hive without spilling and making a mess. So those are some of the challenges. And also notice that you've got this extra rim that goes around all three sides here, and it goes behind the frame. That's where your brood chamber is going to sit, because if you just simply put your brood chamber on your otherwise bottom board, your bees wouldn't have an entrance. So these extra pieces of wood elevate the brood chamber so that you still have an entrance for your bees. So you need these extra pieces of wood. They come with the trap, but it still is somewhat problematic. Now, the next one, the Hood Beetle Trap, again, all these work much the same way. In this case, it mounts onto a frame, onto the bottom bar of a frame, and you'd put this frame in the number 1 or number 8 or 10 position, depending on whether you're using 8 or 10 frame equipment. You can sort of make out these partitions that are in here through the wall of that, and what you do is you put apple cider in one of the partitions and mineral oil or vegetable oil in the other compartments, and as the bees chase the beetles, again, they dive down through this slot in the cover, and they get down into here and they drown. Now, the downside to this trap is that you've got a whole frame space being taken up for a trap. That can be a bit problematic. But you can work with that. When we talk about Varroa and drone trapping, you can take the drone comb that will be built in this space and cut it out and use that as a means to help reduce your Varroa as well. And you can actually put in the top up here, you can put a starter strip of drone foundation, and the bees will use that as a template and continue to draw out drone comb as they move it down on both sides. And then when you go in to check your trap, again, you cut that drone comb out, you remove some Varroa, and you also have trapped beetles as well. So some pros and cons again. This one, I should actually have a picture here of it between some frames. Unfortunately, I don't. But basically, this, your top bars, this sits between two frames. So the top bar of one frame is sort of right here, and this comb-like pattern sort of hooks over the top, and then you've got another top bar over here that going out this way. So this sort of nests between in the space between two frames. And again, you fill this up with a little bit of vegetable oil or mineral oil, and as the beetles get chased around, they dive down through these little openings here in this comb. You can see all these little openings as I move down the comb right here, they dive down into those, into the vegetable oil, and they die. So this is working with the sort of the fact that the bees are going to chase these beetles. The beetles are going to do their best to seek some safety spot, some place that the bees can't go, and end up drowning in a liquid that we fill these traps up with. So that's the premise behind these. Now, the other thing that you can do, and it is in fact a pesticide, but it's outside of the beehive, is something called Guard Star. And Guard Star is a soil drench. So you apply it to the soil surrounding your hive. What happens, if I back up here a slide, these larvae, in order for them to pupate, to mature into an adult beetle, such as this one right here, they must leave the hive. And so they basically work their way out the hive. They go down into the soil, they burrow down into the soil, and that's where they complete their life cycle and mature into the adult beetle. What Guard Star does is basically kills the larva in the soil. So you can use that outside the hive as a means to deal with small hive beetle. Now, and also I should mention that integrated pest management does not necessarily equal non-pesticide use. It works with the biology and behavior of the target organism to sort of either mitigate or alleviate the use altogether, or at least lessen the use of pesticides needed to treat for that particular pest. So in this case, the Guard Star is lessening our need by treating outside of the hive. We're working with the natural development of the beetle by trying to kill these larvae outside the hive and preventing new adults from emerging. Now, of course, the problem with that strategy is that if you've got a really bad infestation, they have already wreaked havoc. They have already created this problem before they have left your hive. So this sort of reduces the population, but does not necessarily spare your hive if you've got problems. Again, another pro, another con. The real problem that I've seen with hive beetle is in the honey house. People will harvest their honey, they'll bring a super full of honey back to the honey house, and maybe it's Sunday afternoon, and you've harvested your hive, and you've got you've got a barbecue to go to later on in the day, and you don't get back in time to actually extract the honey. Now you've got a full super sitting there of honey, or multiple supers, and now it's Monday again, and you got to go back to work. That darn job getting in the way of things. So you go back to work, and it's the following weekend. Well, now what's happened is you've taken your honey super off the hive, and in doing so, if you've done a good job, you've also removed the bees from that honey super, because you don't want to bring those bees back to your honey house or your kitchen or garage, wherever you're doing your extracting. So you've gotten the bees out of that honey super, but you may not have gotten the beetles out of that honey super. And so now here they have free reign of this honey super, no bees to chase them around, nothing to contend with. They can run amok. So the best advice in this case is, if you harvest your honey, extract it within 3 days of harvesting it. That gives you a safe window to get that honey out before you see this mess. And I can tell you, folks, I have seen this mess from that very scenario. A customer harvested their honey, they did not extract it, and he brought me a frame of honey that was just, I was afraid to touch it. It was so gross looking. So this is a good case where we can learn from other people's mistakes, and so make sure if you harvest, you extract. That will be your best defense against the hive beetle and the honey ants. Okay, now, the Varroa. Varroa mite. Let's just talk real briefly. I'm not going to go into a lot of the reproductive nature of Varroa. That's a different talk. That's a different time. But real quick, I do want to mention that basically there's only a few pockets on the planet that are Varroa free. And more than likely, I'm willing to bet that everyone listening, there may be one or two, But everyone listening, you're not in one of those Varroa-free pockets. If you're in the lower 48 in the contiguous U.S., you are not in a Varroa-free pocket. Hawaii used to be a Varroa-free pocket until about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And then they discovered Varroa. They're trying to contain it, but I think their efforts are going to be met with disappointment. There are some other places, but again, these pockets of Varroa that are Varroa-free are few and far between. So you're going to have to accept the fact that you will have Varroa. How you deal with them, that's up to you. The good news is that Varroa, in terms of how they move around in the hive, they're not very mobile. Now, they are mobile in terms of spreading from hive to hive, so even if by chance you happen to get a Varroa-free colony, maybe you got a package and you saturated that package with sucricide before installing it and killed off any Varroa that might be on those bees. What's going to happen, and they've proven this, that this does in fact happen, even though it seems rather unlikely, your bees, from your Varroa-free colony, they're going to go out and seek nectar. They will visit flowers for pollen, and in doing so, they will come in contact with other bees. And there is bee-to-bee transfer of mites on flower blossoms. So now your bees come back home and they bring this lovely pest with them. So inevitably, no matter how hard you try, your colonies will have Varroa. Sorry to say. Now, once they're in the colony, they behave much like a tick. And so we can use this to our advantage. They don't sort of scurry about looking for a bee to hop onto and parasitize. They sort of hang out like a tick, waiting for something to walk by so they can latch on and hitch a ride and complete their life cycle. The other thing that's worth noting is that the Varroa mite's not native to the European honeybee, which is the honeybee that we all manage. It's native to a bee that is in Southeast Asia. It made the jump from that species to the honeybee species that we manage, and is believed to have migrated up through the former Soviet Union into Europe, into Africa, has made it to the U.S. in the mid to late 80s. And of course is spread around the world everywhere in between. So the bees that have had the most exposure, the longest exposure to the Varroa mites are the Russian bees, which is why you hear a lot about the Russian queens being resistant to Varroa, or more able to deal with Varroa. They're not really resistant. I guess they're more tolerant is a way of phrasing it. Now, and also the fact that in the native species, the Varroa mite tends to parasitize only the drones, which means we can use that because when they're on the European honeybee, they tend to prefer the drones. They will reproduce in worker cells, but they tend to prefer the drones. The other really beneficial thing here is that they reproduce under the capped cells. So essentially, if we can trap them inside a cell, we can therefore remove them. And in fact, we can trap them. And I'll show you how. All right. Let's just, there's some of you I know that are listening and watching that have not seen Varroa mites. I apologize for the blurriness of this photo, but the point of this photo is not to see the detail of the Varroa mite, but rather put it into scale. Give it, put it in proportion to the size of the bee. And this, in fact, is a Varroa right here, and this is a Varroa right here. This is deformed wing virus, a nasty virus that Varroa transmits. But those are Varroa mites on adult bees. So now you get a sense of how big these things are in comparison to the adult bees. Okay, about, if it were sucking on you and in scale to you, it'd be about the size of a dinner plate. Let's talk about some of the things, and these are just the more common. There's lots of other ways, some ways that are more controversial, it would of dealing with Varroa mite that would fall into the IPM category. Hygienic bees is an excellent one. Hygienic behavior is somewhat subjectively, by a lot of breeders, it's subjectively assessed at how hygienic bees can be. Researchers actually have quantitative tests that take the subjectivity out of it, but a lot of queen breeders are sort of doing it anecdotally. Oh, that one doesn't have much Varroa, that one must be hygienic. And there's that extreme, and then there's the extreme of breeders that are actually doing chill tests, freeze tests to see how hygienic the bees are, and sort of everything in between. But hygienic bees, which isn't on the list. Small cell foundation, I'll mention. It's not on the list. It's one of those controversial IPM techniques. I always just say, if you're using a small cell foundation and it's working for you, keep on going. But everything that I've seen, the data just is not there to support its effectiveness in dealing with Varroa. Breaking the brood cycle, the Varroa reproduction cycle is tied to bee reproduction. If you interrupt the bee reproduction, you interrupt the Varroa reproduction. So you can do splits, and that split will temporarily throw your new colony into a period of time where the brood cycle is broken because your new queen is going to be caged, or if you're of the mind of letting them raise out a new queen, now you've broken that brood cycle for several weeks, and so that's going to impact the Varroa population as well. So those are some of the things that I'm not going to cover in detail, but I thought I'd mention. Screen bottom boards. It is a bit controversial, but it has a lot in terms of how much it actually helps control Varroa. But I put it on here because it helps us understand what's going on inside the colony. And I'll talk about that in a second. Drone trapping, this is the premise behind this, and I'll go into each one in more detail. The premise behind drone trapping is that you're capturing the mite underneath a capped drone cell. We know the mites prefer the drones. They gravitate towards them. More mites will enter a drone cell as opposed to a worker cell. So if we can capture them under the cell, if we can capture the mites under the cell and remove that drone frame, we'll be removing a lot of mites. And powdered sugar. And this is sort of something that's really been gaining popularity in the last, say, year or two. And so I thought I'd go over that as well. So let's talk first about the screened bottom boards. This is essentially what it looks like. As the name implies, the bottom is screened. And in the case of our screened bottom boards, we put this grid on a sheet that slides in underneath the bottom board. It can slide in from the front or the back. It doesn't matter. There's a little shelf underneath this board here and underneath this board here that sheet will rest on. The purpose of this board, or whatever it is you're putting in under here, is to catch mites as they fall. So if you apply a little bit of Pam cooking oil to this, or a thin layer of Vaseline to this, what will happen is these mites will fall from the hive, and when they do, they will fall onto this, through the screen, onto the board, and get stuck on this screen. And now here's a Varroa mite, here's a Varroa mite, another one, here's 4 more down here, and there's some other partial ones scattered about. So that's what you're going to be looking for on this grid. Now, as you might imagine, and as we saw on the previous slides, they're tiny and difficult to see, which is why we have a grid pattern here, because if it's solid white and you're sort of scanning through, well, did I count this one or not? With a grid pattern, it makes it easier to know where you've been, where you've counted, where you haven't, and get a more accurate number. Because you will need to count these mites to determine your mite load. And no matter what you're doing for Varroa control, whether it be IPM techniques or using pesticides, you'll need to know your Varroa count to know exactly what's going on and how healthy your hive may or may not be. So that's why the gridded bottom. The way to use that gridded bottom, slip it in, leave it there for 3 days, pull it out, count up your mites, and divide by 3. And that will give you your average mite drop per 24 hours. And that's what everything is referenced in terms of, a 24-hour mite drop. Now, that's for monitoring. How does this actually help with mite control, and how effective is it in mite control? That's where the screen bottom board, the Varroa screen, gets a little dicey. There's some studies that say they're very effective. Others that say they don't really do much at all. So it depends on what you read. We do know that these mites, again, they're not very mobile. They wait for bees to come to them, and then they latch on. Well, if it happens to make, if this mite tried to make a transfer from one bee to another up in the hive and didn't make it, wasn't successful, and falls down through the screen and now is stuck on this board here because there's some PAM or Vaseline, we know that this mite now is out of our colony and they're not going to go up there and parasitize our bees. So from that standpoint, it's very effective. I also think, just from a pure management perspective, the screen bottom helps with ventilation, and also, as I've already mentioned, it helps with monitoring. All right, let's talk about drone trapping. This, in my opinion, is perhaps the most effective IPM technique that you can use for Varroa mite. The premise behind it is, again, you've got a frame. We know that in this case, this is that one-piece plastic Pirco frame. It fits in a deep hive. If you've got medium-sized boxes, we sell a drone foundation. Again, it comes, unfortunately, it's only made in deep, for deep frames, but it's wax, so you can cut it to fit in your medium-sized frames. The premise behind this is that it's drone cells, which is a larger cell. The bees will only draw it out as drone. It sort of concentrates where they are raising drone, which is nice. So they're not gonna run amok in your brood nest by converting worker cells to drone cells. They'll still do it somewhat, but not quite as much. So it concentrates where they're building their drone. And what you're going to do is put this frame or wooden frame with wax drone foundation into your hive. You're going to wait until that queen has laid the drone eggs and they have capped over these cells, and then you're going to pull this frame out, and if it's the plastic frame like this, you can freeze it or you can wash it down with a hose. If you hold this frame at arm's length and blast it at an angle with a garden hose, it'll shear the caps off. The water will sort of fly across like this. It'll blow the caps off and flush out the drone pupa and also the mites. If you've got the wax foundation, you can't do that because you'll end up damaging the comb. You just want to freeze this frame for at least 48 hours. Again, if you've got that wax foundation, be very, very careful because we know wax gets very brittle when it's cold, so you don't want to damage it. And then what you can do is, so you're taking one out, you're going to put one in its place in the hive. So you put this frame in, you leave it there for about 24 days, then you pull it out, you put an empty one in its place, you freeze the full one, you can leave it in the freezer if you want until you're ready to replace them, and then go back about another 24 to 28 days to pull out the next frame, put in the one that was in the freezer back into the hive. The bees will uncap it, they'll clean out the pupa, they'll clean out the cells and get it ready again. Just make sure when you take it out of the freezer, you let it thaw a little bit so you're not putting a popsicle inside your hive. That's not a very good thing. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put it either in the number 2 or the number 3 position. And that's where you want this frame to be, so it's not interrupting the actual brood nest of the worker cells. It's sort of out on the margins. So the 2 or 3 position is sort of the ideal. Now, the one drawback, the one very, very big drawback to this is that you're going to be doing this during the growing season. Whenever your bees are reproducing, after the first few months of spring, you can start drone trapping. Now, as the summer progresses, you're going to be stacking honey supers on top of your hive. And as you stack up those honey supers, it makes it harder and harder every 24 to 28 days to get down into your brood chamber, pull this frame out, put an empty one in, restack your honey supers. Honey's going everywhere. You're making a mess. Plus, they're heavy. Plus, the hive is tall. You know, it's a gangbuster year. You've got a step ladder out there because they're stacked to the clouds with honey supers. And you've got to tear that hive apart to get down to your brood chamber to pull this frame out. That is the biggest drawback to this. Or, I guess the other big drawback would be if you're a procrastinator and don't get this frame out in time, you are going to cause your Varroa population to skyrocket. So don't forget to take this frame out. Now, there is a way around the need of having to unstack all your honey supers and restack them. I'm going to show this next slide, but before I do, I have to throw up a little disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that this is sort of an advanced type thing. You've got to have a pretty good understanding of your bees and know what's going on and a bit about hive management and bee biology and everything else. But here we go. This is something that I worked with Dennis Van Engelsdorp at Penn State University. He was doing a talk at a meeting, and he threw up this idea, and I thought it was just fabulous. The premise is this. I've got, in this case, I'm using 10-frame deep brood chambers. Okay, I've got them on a pallet. This is my backyard, or was my backyard. I've since moved, but anyway. So this was my backyard. I've got 2 deep brood chambers here, and I've got 2 deep brood chambers here. There is a queen in this colony. There's my queue. And there is a queen in this colony as well. Now, the trick here is you have to prevent the queens from ever coming in contact with one another. And the way to do that is you can just barely make it out right here, a plastic queen excluder that is straddling half of one colony and half of another colony. And what this does is it forms a seal going down the center of this hive toward the back. So it prevents one queen from coming up through the honey supers and back down into the other hive and killing off that queen and infighting. And what's interesting is the bees from this side will gladly go up through that honey or through that queen excluder into the honey supers, as will the bees from this side, and feed the same stack of honey supers, and they will not fight up here. That's the question I always get. Do you get infighting between the workers that are feeding these honey supers? And the answer is no. So they'll go up there, they'll fill those supers just fine. Now, what this accomplishes is that you can take, this is a homemade sort of migratory cover type lid it basically is a migratory cover for a nuke box, if you will. I have one here and one here to cover up half of this brood chamber and half of this brood chamber. And now, if we look at this picture down here, what we're actually looking at is we're sort of looking down at the hive right in here. Here's my handhold. Here's the handhold of the upper super. Here's the handhold here. Here's the handhold here. Okay, just for orientation, that's where we are. And now my drone frame, all I've got to do to remove it is pop this off, and there's my drone frame. Now, in this case, when I was doing this study, I had the drone frame in at position 1, 2, 3, 4. As I mentioned in the previous slide, I would do it in position either 2 or 3. I think I had it just a little too close to the worker brood nest. So now I can pull these off, access my drone frame, and I can actually do a brood inspection. Is my queen laying well? Do I have a brood disease? I can inspect my brood nest right here without having to touch my honey supers, which is nice. You know, as we get older and our backs get a little weaker, not having to lift these things on and off is fantastic. So now what we've got is we've got these drone removal frames here, or drone removal and Varroa removal frames, and it works very, very well. And the other benefit to this is that essentially what we've got is a 2-queen colony, 1, 2, feeding a single stack of supers, and the division of labor and the efficiency of work is such that we actually get a little bit better honey harvest from this arrangement than if these were 2 separate hives. So this is a very, very nice way to do drone trapping. And I'm sure I'm going to have tons of questions on that in just a minute. The last thing I want to cover is powdered sugar. Now, this came to be because there's this thing called a sugar shape. And it's another way to monitor your Varroa mite population. You basically take a half a cup of bees, which is about 300 bees. You put them into a mason jar with some powdered sugar. You slosh them around, and then you sprinkle the sugar out of the top. And what happens is the sugar dislodges the mite from the bee. It sort of plugs up the feet of the bee, or of the mite rather, and it becomes dislodged from the bee. Now, what people have started to do is apply that same technique of dislodging the mites from the bees on the colony level rather than on just simply a sample of 300 bees. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can remove your cover, okay? You can take a flour sifter and sort of sift sugar, powdered sugar, onto the top bars of your hive, and then take a bee brush and simply sweep it down between the frames so it sort of falls down inside the hive through the spaces of the frames and coats the bees with sugar. Now what happens is you've got coated bees, the mites become dislodged, but also you get grooming behavior. You get sort of that preening behavior of the bees, and they probably knock off additional mites as well. So you can do a flour sifter. You can just simply take a cup of powdered sugar and dump it on top of your frames and sweep it down through the colony. And now recently they've come out with this thing right here, which someone asked me a couple weeks ago what it is, and it's a powdered sugar blower, or as I was referring to it then, a powdered sugar puffer blower thingy, because we didn't really have a good name for it, but powdered sugar blower is what we're going with. Basically, what happens is this is sort of a canister where you can put powdered sugar, and this is sort of like a fireplace bellows, that when you expand, it has a little ratchet down here that sifts powdered sugar into a chamber, and then when you squeeze the bellows together, it forces the powdered sugar down through this wand, and you can see that we're actually getting powdered sugar. This is sort of like smoke. This is powdered sugar coming up out of the top of the hive. And you can even see it here a little bit. Right back here, you can see some of that powdered sugar coming out at the top of the hive by puffing it through the entrance. So this is a real quick way that you can just go down a series of colonies and blow powdered sugar into the entrance of the hive and treat your hive. Now the questions that I'm sure are going to come up, so let me try and address them now, are how often do I need to do these things? The drone frame, if you're using the drone frame, doing some Varroa trapping, again, I would do it during the growing season. You can do it all summer long. I would probably not start immediately if you've got a package or a nuke that you're just starting off with this year. I probably wouldn't start doing it until maybe mid-June or July. And that gives your colony enough time to sort of grow. They're not going to be very interested in producing drones anyway. If you've got an overwintered colony, I might start doing this in May. That's when they really sort of ratchet up the drone population for swarming season. So you can start in May, and again, pulling out that frame every 24 to 28 days. Some people say 30 days. That way you let a few drones emerge out so that they're available for mating with queens out there in the environment. Should a colony swarm, there's drones in the surrounding area for them, the virgin to mate with. So 24, 28 days, maybe a little longer if you'd like. The powdered sugar, if you're using powdered sugar as a means to help control Varroa, now this would be those folks that said you're using organic or IPM techniques exclusively to control your pests and disease. I would do this. I would do powdered sugar every time you go into the hive. And for me right now, I'm doing work in my hives about once a week at once every 2 weeks. I've got a hive that I've got to pop some supers on tonight. You're looking at that sort of regimen. If you're just trying to keep the population low until you can use maybe a strip, if you're into the category of people that are using IPM and pesticides, you're looking to this to sort of keep the population low until you can apply a medicated strip. Then you're looking at maybe doing it once every 2 to 3, 4 weeks or so. Just keep the population down and knock it back. And drop those mites out through the screen at the bottom. And it's important to note that if you're using powdered sugar, this has to be a screen bottom board. Otherwise, you'll just end up with a mound of sugar at the bottom of the hive inside here. So make sure you've got a screen bottom board in place there. All right. Now that's all I've got. Last time I had someone say all I can see is a black screen, so I'm going to back up to that one so that you know that we're still live here. Let me expand my window, and let me get to some questions. Will this webinar be available as well as others? Yeah, hopefully. I'm testing a new version of our website. I'm hoping to have that launched basically the end of this month, and we'll have a link, calling it the video library, where all these webinars will be available to access at any point in time. Let's see here. Are hive beetles found in more areas more areas over others? Northern versus southern. They're definitely. They came into Florida originally, and so there's and the soils are more conducive for the beetle in southern climates than they are in northern climates. Remember that larva has to leave the hive to go into the soil to finish its maturation period. It needs to pupate into the adult. And to do that, it needs certain soil conditions. They like sandy loam. So if you're on rocky clay soil, you're going to have less of a problem with hive beetle. If you're up north, the soil temperatures don't really get warm enough until later in the summer, so the window of opportunity for them to pupate in the soil is shorter. So they're less of a problem up in the north than they are in the south. So yes, that's a good question. Is a compost pile within 50 feet of a hive Woo! It's going downhill quick tonight, folks. Sorry. Detrimental to a hive. A small household compost pile is probably going to be less of a concern than sort of this commercial-sized compost pile that will draw them in from quite a ways. So I would say probably not. I've got a compost pile that's probably about 50 feet from my hives as well, and haven't really noticed anything. When do you install a hive beetle trap? Keep one always in a hive. Hive beetles are fast little buggers. They dart and weave, zig and zag, and they can be difficult to spot. Once you do see them, you start to see them more frequently if you've got them in your hive. For me, that's a tough one because I've seen hive beetles in my hives and I have not used a trap just because I try and maintain my hives, good strong colonies. If I start to see them reproducing, I would definitely keep a hive beetle trap in my hive at all times. I've never seen them reproducing in my hive. I might find a larva sort of nested between, you know, like the end bar of a frame in the corner of the hive body. But that's fine. It's sort of quarantined there. If it tries to get out, the bees will get it. If I see them on my comb, I'm concerned. So I would definitely have a beetle trap in my hive at all times at that point. During the winter time, not so important. Hive beetles are attracted to drone comb because of the longer gestational period for the drones, correct? No, they tend to be more up in the honey supers or after the pollen. But I've never seen them actually going through the larva. But admittedly, I haven't seen a whole lot of hives that have been infested with beetles. It's my experience with them primarily has been either in a hive that's kept them under control or in the honey house. But I suspect that drone versus worker, I haven't heard from anyone having a problem because they've got drone comb in their colony. Does it help to move hives to new locations each year? Hive rotation, kind of like crop rotation. I would say probably not. Varroa is going to get there one way or another. Other diseases are going to accumulate in the hive, so if you move that hive, you're going to take them with you anyway. Hive beetle, like I said, they can key in on a failing hive from miles and miles away, and so moving it around will probably have little benefit to you. When do you treat for these? What do we do during nectar flow as maintenance? So I assume well, it doesn't specify Varroa or hive beetle. The nice thing about everything that we've talked about here is that I just want to make sure I didn't mention anything that I'll lump into this category. The powdered sugar you can use during a nectar flow. The beetle traps you can use during a nectar flow. The drone trapping during a nectar flow. The soil drench, it's outside the hive, so you can use it during a nectar flow. So I'm fairly certain I haven't mentioned anything that you can't use right now during a nectar flow. So if your bees are reproducing, you can use these things to help control your Varroa. If you've got beetles running amok, you can use these things to help control that population. Is there a Varroa mite season? Yes, of sorts. And again, here's where you get a little bit of a difference between the north and the south. Remember, the Varroa mite reproduction is tied to the bee reproduction. So if your colony goes broodless, which they do generally in the winter, the mite population crashes a little bit. So what that means is if you're in the north, you've got a longer broodless period than you do in the south, and so the mite population crashes just a little bit more. And then you get into spring, and you get into the growing season, and you get into the time frame where bees are reproducing, and what happens is the mite population grows exponentially as you move through summer. So the worst time for mites are sort of July, August, September, and if you haven't done something about it then October gets really ugly for in November, December, January for survivorship of the colony. So you do have to mitigate the mite population somehow so that your colony doesn't crash. But late summer is sort of the high season for Varroa. Okay, so does the screen bottom board need to be sticky to keep the mites from getting back into the hive? If you have an open screen, will the mites fall to the ground and die? they have done a little bit of work where a mite can walk a short distance and may be able to make it back up into the hive, but generally speaking, they fall down onto that board, they sort of wander around a little bit and end up perishing. So you don't necessarily have to. It certainly wouldn't hurt to apply, like, again, a Vaseline, a layer of Vaseline, or some PAM, which is nice because you can just spray it on to provide a little adhesive. You know, these are tiny little mites. You don't need contact cement down there to glue these suckers to the sticky board. Just a little bit of something for them to stick in works just fine. Is it true that comb on the bottom underside of frames is always drone comb? How can I recognize drone comb from drone comb on the frame itself? Generally speaking, the between frames or the underside of frames, yeah, they'll build drone there a lot of times. How can you recognize the difference between drone on the frame versus worker on the frame? Drone, let me, bear with me here, let me back up. I don't think I have a slide in here anywhere of, yeah, that's all open cells. Well, all right. Let's see if we can't work with these pictures here. This is worker. This is worker brood here. Okay. First off, the size difference between drone, which, you know, unless I don't have a picture with them side by side. I'm sorry. So it'll be difficult to compare sizes. But you've got, these are relatively flat. Yes, there's a little bit of a dome shape to the cell, but relatively flat cell. They're not really rising up off the comb. Fairly small cell compared to the drone. Where is it? And I'm not zoomed in as close as I was with that other one. But here, these cells are really, they're often referred to as bullet shaped. They're really domed coming up off the foundation or off the frame. And also the cell size is quite a bit bigger, much, much bigger. So those are some of the general characteristics. Unfortunately, I'm sorry I don't have a picture of them side by side, but as you go through your hive, here's what you do. Take a piece of that comb that's at the bottom of or between frames or at the bottom of the frame and compare it to comb that's got worker brood in it, and you'll be able to see the difference. Can you cut down a piece of Purco drone frame, or cut down a Purco drone frame to a medium size? You can, yeah. You lose the strength of the bottom bar, so to speak, but it'll work just fine. That'll work great. Will the presentation be available for playback? Yep. I'll be posting it up there to our website. How about a webinar on a 2-hive system? Maybe. I can look into that. Let's see. Oh, so here's someone that says, is using powdered sugar temperature dependent? I've heard it needs to be in the mid-90s for it to work best. Honestly, John, I haven't heard anything regarding temperature dependence. Jennifer Berry, who is producing queens for us, uses powdered sugar as her primary method of mite control, and she's never mentioned it to me. But of course, she's down in Georgia where it could easily be in the 90s. But I've never heard of it being temperature sensitive. Again, the premise behind it, as I understand it, and as it's always been explained to me, is that it sort of dislodges, causes the mites to dislodge because their feet, they get their feet plugged up. And so they can't hold on. And I don't know how temperature might play a part in that. So I don't think so. Let's see here. How much powdered sugar if I sift it? I would say about a cup. Powdered sugar, can you use powdered sugar with honey supers? Yes, you can, because it's going to fall down between and get on the bees. Some purists out there would say, well, you're getting powdered sugar in your honey. It probably won't be a whole heck of a lot, but yes, you probably will get a little bit in there. So again, it all depends on your personal preference. How much sugar per super? I would say, again, well, a little bit depends on the size of the hive. If it's just the brood chamber, I'd go with a cup. If you're getting more into the honey supers, maybe a cup or two. Please discuss pros and cons of Russian bees. I might not be the best person to discuss the pros and cons of Russian bees. Although I haven't tried one, Russian Queen, recently. A few years ago, I tried several from different breeders. There's no doubt about it. Their overwintering abilities are phenomenal. Their ability to tolerate Varroa is very, very good. And if managed properly, my best honey harvest I have ever gotten came from a Russian colony. So they're very good that way in terms of disease resistance, overwintering, resource conservation. They respond very quickly to environmental changes, nectar dearths and such. So they're very good that way. Some cons, from my perspective, and the queens that I've tried, are that they tend to, I don't want to say be more defensive, but they tend to posture a little bit more. They tend to bounce off, they tended to bounce off my veil more so than, say, Carniolans or Italians. So when you started working the hive, they sort of came out almost, with, I sort of picture this puffed up bully that, as soon as you challenge them, they sort of turn and walk away, but they come at you all puffed up, and hoping that you don't call their bluff. That's sort of the way I describe my experience with Russians, is that they come at you and they bounce off your veil trying to put on a good show, but really they're not any more likely to sting you than any other bee. The other thing about them is that they do tend to, in my experience again, tend to be a little bit more swarmy. They tend to swarm much more frequently and readily than some other races of bees. And that's why I said, if you manage them properly, you can get a very, very good honey harvest off of them. But if you're just a little bit late, you could be looking at a swarm hanging in a tree. So those are some of the cons, as I see it. So does powdered sugar get into the uncapped honey cells? A little bit can, yep. Do you freeze hive beetles from comb? Freezing will kill the hive beetle. Yes. How often powdered sugar method with first year hive? Start when? You could powder sugar them really at any point. And again, how often depends a little bit on what your strategy is. And here's where I just can't, I can give you some guidelines, but I just can't tell you, on the 10th day, every 10 days do this, because it depends a little bit on your strategy. If you're, that poll that I threw up at the beginning, if you're in sort of the group of people, the 51% I think that said they're using organic or IPM techniques, you're going to want to do it more frequently, weekly or every other week. If you're in the group of the, 40% that said you're using IPM, and in conjunction with that you're using some pesticides, maybe a medicated strip or something like that, then you don't have to do it quite as frequently, because you're just trying to keep the population low, knowing that you're going to have this treatment that's really going to do the bulk of the work at the end of the season. So there you're looking at, maybe 2, 3, or even 4 weeks rotation. Do I have any experience using oxalic acid vaporizer for Varroa control? Okay, here's my disclaimer, James. Oxalic acid is not a certified, registered treatment for use in a beehive. Therefore, using it, technically speaking, is a violation of the law. However, I know it's used elsewhere in the world, and even used here by some beekeepers in the U.S. Here's my take on it. I have, no one from EPA is listening, are they? I have tested, on test hives that I never harvested honey for, it was part of a research project, I have tested the trickle method of administering oxalic acid, and I much prefer that over the vaporization method. The vaporization method, the oxalic acid is a carcinogen when vaporized, and there is some anecdotal evidence that it can that it's linked to kidney cancer. So I much prefer the trickle method, and for that you need to have a broodless colony. So you need to, ideally, a broodless colony. So you're looking at a late season treatment, but you need something before that to keep your population of mites low, because if you're relying on a broodless time to treat your hive, it's going to be much too late if you haven't done something earlier in the season. Hopefully that makes sense. If you want more information about the trickle method, it is legal in Canada. If you go to Google and type in Canadian Honey Council oxalic acid, it used to be the very first link in your search results that outlined how to use oxalic acid in the trickle method. Do you need to crack the cover on a hive before using the powdered sugar as in your pictures? I did that one just to illustrate the fact that it was making it up to the top of the hive. You will need to allow air to escape the top, because what you're doing is you want, when you puff in, essentially you're blowing air in, so you need to have air someplace where that air can come out. And it's best to have the release at the top of the hive so that the powdered sugar sort of goes up. So it is good to have at least some air escape, but no hive is perfectly sealed. It'll either come out the entrance or out the upper entrance in the notch of our inner cover or something like that. So it's not necessary, but it does help to have it open a little bit. Do I recommend Appolite Var in addition to IPM? Appolite Var, I'll say this, Appolite Var and Mite Away 2, I didn't include them here, although they're both recognized as organic treatments elsewhere in the world. They're not here in the U.S. And technically speaking, they're sort of in pesticides, but the nice thing about both of these is that they're using organic acids. They're using things that are already present in the hive, and it's a very, very safe product for the honey, for the bees. So Appolite Var, Mite Away 2, absolutely, I do recommend those over using some of the other treatments, but I always advocate IPM, and then if that doesn't work, which usually IPM does not work exclusively, then using something like Appolite Var or the Mite Away 2. Let's see. Let's see here. Oh, so someone's asking about the reddish hole at the bottom of the honey super. That was a upper entrance that I had plugged. That was in the, let's see, where was that? Right there. This little hole. It's just an upper entrance that I have sealed with a little plastic plug. Are Varroa mites always reddish? The adults are, yes. The immature ones are not, but only the sexually reproductively mature mites are going to be the ones causing problems. If they're not mature sexually, they will not emerge from the cells and cause problems. They may come out of the cells and end up on your sticky board, but the adults will always be red. Let's see. How can you keep ants out of a hive and a feeder? I need to try this. I haven't had ants in my hives yet, but try. Someone told me this. Don't know whether it will work. This is just, beekeepers sharing information. If you've got ants in your hive on your inner cover or in a feeder, try putting a twig from an apple tree on top of your inner cover. And if it works, you heard it here first. If it doesn't, I have no idea what you're talking about. Someone at a bee meeting threw that out as a remedy for ants. I haven't had a chance to test it. It was this past year that someone told me. So give it a go, and if you have luck with it, let me know so I can tell others. If you do powdered sugar in the hive and falls to the bottom, will it attract hive beetles? No, they like the real cue for hive beetles is sort of fermentation. That fermentation smell of pollen, because they do ferment the pollen just a little bit. And so in a failing hive, that fermentation odor gets a little stronger, as well as some other pheromones in the colony that the beetles cue in on, but the powdered sugar shouldn't attract any more beetles. At a bee meeting, we were told to pull the drone frame every 2 weeks. You will certainly get, at that point, every 2 weeks. Yes, they will, hold on, I always have to do my math backwards. Yes, they will be capped over just barely from the time you put it in. The drones will be capped over, the mites will be sealed in there, and you can do that, and you'll probably get additional generations of drone, if you will. But there's a lot of people out there that say having a few drones emerge out of the hive or out of that frame is not a bad thing. The colony naturally wants to have about 10% drone, and they will get it one way or another. So this way you're sort of controlling where they get it from. Brand new hive, when would you start looking for Varroa or hive beetle? I would start monitoring now, just to know what your population is. You might be able to wait another couple, maybe into June, mid-June, before you start doing some real monitoring for mites. Because I'm assuming it's from a package. You're broodless at that point. The bees have been treated before they're put in the package, and so it's not as important to start really early for Varroa monitoring with a package. How many small hive beetle traps are needed per hive body? It depends on how bad the infestation is. If it's just a couple scurrying around, I would just put one in there. If you've got a handful of them running around and you see reproduction occurring, then I would probably throw in 2 or 3. Is there a book that I would suggest on how to manage a 2-queen colony? What is that? What is that book? Is it C.C. Miller that was published years and years ago that talks about a 2-queen colony? I think it is. I can't remember the name of the book, but C.C. Miller is the author. He's one of the old-time beekeepers, one of the pioneers in the industry years ago. Will powdered sugar application make bees become more hygienic over time versus good gene quality? Unfortunately, no, because the genetics will remain the same, and hygienic behavior is sort of a genetically linked thing, not necessarily a behavior thing. So what's going to happen is the only way to get that hygienic behavior is through breeding of queens, selecting for it, and then getting one of those queens in the hive. Using powdered sugar is not gonna create hygienic bees. What's the best way to introduce a screen bottom board for new colonies? On a nice, warm, sunny day, which seem to be few and far between this year, but we're bound to get one sooner or later. Go to your hive, take off your brood chambers, put down your screen bottom board, and restack your brood chambers. That's pretty much it. You're just going to take off your brood chambers, and if you've got someone with a good strong back and your colony's not too populous, if it's a new one, they might just be able to lift up the stack of brood chambers, and you can switch out your bottom board or place the screen on top of your existing bottom board while that person just elevates it a couple inches, and you can do a real quick swap. Oh, yes, Matt, excellent point. Might mention that full sun versus shade helps with hive beetles. Excellent, excellent point. That having your hives in full sun, not only with hive beetles, but with a lot of other things as well. Full sun helps with overall hive health. So that's a really good point. Thank you for mentioning that. Can you show us a beetle trap and how to place it in the hive? I've got these back here. Go back, go back, go back, back. Oh, there they are. So this is the West Beetle Trap that goes at the bottom. This is the Hood Beetle Trap that just attaches to a frame, and the frame would just go inside the hive. And this, unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it in the hive, but it sort of rests right at the top here, between two frames. So these comb type prongs would hang over this way on this frame, and then this side over here would sort of hang over onto the adjacent frame. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it in place. I'm sorry. Let's see. Do you check on the bottom hive box, assuming 2 stacked deep hive bodies during the summer while inspecting the hive? I reverse the deep hive bodies in late March, early April. If I get into the top brood chamber and I see a good pattern and I don't see any disease, I rarely will go down into that bottom brood chamber. I treated my yard with milky spore for Japanese beetles. Will that help with hive beetles? Huh. I don't know. I just don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry. I don't know. Instead of soil drench, can you use a large sheet of plastic? You probably could. It would have to be pretty big. If it were a sunny day, those larvae may get baked on that plastic before they made it to the edge and actually duck down in. But if it were an overcast day where the sun's not going to cook them, they still may be able to make it to the edge unless it's a really big plastic sheet. How well do AJ beetle eaters work in comparison to other traps? They work very well. The nice thing about them, too, is that they're right there at the top of the hive, or top of the brood chambers, usually where you put them, or where you can put them at the top of your honey supers. But they do work well. They're easy to get to, easy to clean. They probably need to be checked more frequently, because of all the traps, it's the smallest. So that would be a downside. Does it make a difference whether you treat with powdered sugar in morning or night? If you can catch them with a lot of foragers in the hive, that's ideal, because what you're treating for are mites that are on the surface of adult bees. If you're doing it in the peak of the day and your field force is out foraging, you're not treating those bees. So when they come back, they're bringing back Varroa mites with them, and those mites are on bees that have not been coated with powdered sugar. So if you can do it in morning or evening before the real foraging is kicked off, or after it's sort of started to calm down a bit, a lot of those foragers are coming back, you'll have better success. What do mites do to the bees? Mites are they're much like a tick. They will suck the hemolymph, which is the bee blood of the bees. When they're reproducing, in the female mite will go into a cell with just before it's capped over with the larva, and they will basically take they'll parasitize that larva. They'll bite into it, creating a wound and a spot for infection. And they also transmit viruses, much like a mosquito can transmit malaria when it sucks your blood. Mites can transmit viruses to the bees while they're sucking their blood. And so you get sort of this overall weakening of the bee, especially when you consider those viruses. How does the open screen overwinter in cold climate? I have, again, many of you know that I've moved down to North Carolina from the Northeast, and I would run colonies with a screen bottom board on those pallets, like you saw in that picture, and they would be open. Granted, it's close to the ground, but it minus 20 degrees some nights, and they did just fine. If you're concerned about it, you can slip that sheet in there. It doesn't seal that screen, which is okay because you want a little bit of ventilation, but it does block most of the air movement. We just sort of talked about that. What's the so what is the rate of infestation, sticky board count at which one should treat? It depends a little bit on where you are. It depends on the time of year. Generally speaking, in the spring, if you're seeing 5 to 10 mites on a sticky board in a 24-hour period, you've got a heavy infestation. If you've got 50 to 60 mites in the fall on a sticky board, then you've got a heavy infestation. So those are some real broad parameters. But again, there's a little bit of variation depending on where you are and of course, the time of year. When using a screen bottom board and a sticky board, will it still ventilate the hive? Yeah, like I just said, it will allow a little bit of air movement through that hive, but it does seal it a little bit. But if the bees are fanning because it's a hot day, they'll be able to draw air up through that screen without much problem. Do I just okay, so I guess person's asking about when to put that sheet in. I basically have that sheet in only when I'm interested in monitoring mites, that Quirk sheet that goes in underneath the screen bottom board. Otherwise, I keep it out and just let debris fall onto the ground. If you hose off the plastic drone frame, are you blasting the comb apart, or does it just blow off the caps and the larvae? Amazingly enough, you don't shoot it straight on. Where is that picture? Down here. You're not shooting sort of straight at the cells. You're sort of coming in at an angle. And so what happens is you do sort of shear off the cells and flush out the larvae and the mites, and it does really leave the comb intact, and you can just shake out the excess water and put that frame right back into the colony, which is nice. If you're tight on freezer space, it's a lovely method to reuse this frame without having to freeze it. And also, I've heard that the drone pupa are good for fishing bait, and also chickens love them. And also, it might just save your marriage if your significant other doesn't like a drone comb in the freezer. Let's see here. What and when is the next webinar? I don't know. I have to confess I'm getting a bit crispy. But we'll get one together. I know there's at least one next month. I'm shooting for, I think the tentative date is June 18th, and I'm working on getting a guest speaker in here. And that's all I can say, because last time I opened my mouth, it didn't pan out. Let's see here. So we got a question about Jennifer Berry's queens. Are they SMR, hygienic? She uses, it's hard to say yes, because it's sort of a gradient there, and so you've got some that sort of exhibit hygienic behavior to some extent, but some that are really good at it. It's sort of like, okay, so you go to you go and watch a field and track event, and you've got the sprinters out there. Well, they're all runners, they're all sprinters, but you got some that can do it a little bit better than others. And so it's the same with hygienic bees. You've got some that can do it a little bit better than others. And I can tell you that she has done chill tests where basically they put, let me clear this out. They usually do it with worker brood, not drone brood, but what they do is they sort of put a tin can, if you will, around a portion they embed it right into the comb, and then they actually pour liquid nitrogen into that can, and it freezes the brood. And then what they do is they go back and see how many of the cells have been uncapped and the pupa removed, and they use that to determine sort of I guess the quality of hygienic behavior, how heightened that behavior is. I know she's done that sort of testing for her selection process. I know she actually uses statistical analysis when she selects her breeder queens. So she is doing a very good job at selecting for hygienic behavior, selecting for resistance, and of course a lot of other characters. We don't want just simply that one character to be the only governing factor when selecting breeders, but she is looking at that, and she's doing a very good job. That's, I guess, sort of a vague and ambiguous answer, but hopefully I've sort of touched on what you were hoping to hear. Let's see. Oh, how about fogging mineral oil for mites? So basically there's contraptions out there that fog sort of vaporized mineral oil, much like the powdered sugar blower, except it's blowing the mineral oil up into the vaporized mineral oil up into the hive. People are having very good success with that. I didn't really mention it. I haven't really seen good quality data on it in terms of efficacy. And also, I haven't seen, and maybe I just haven't looked in the right place, a convenient source for those foggers. I know they're out there. I've seen them. They're rather expensive, some of them anyway, the ones that I've seen. But that I do hear, anecdotally, I hear a lot of people having very good success with fogging with mineral oil. Cinnamon. Someone's had problems with ants, and they're mentioning cinnamon. Yes, that also is a very good thing. Can get a little expensive. Cinnamon's not all that cheap. Oh, but here's something that I've got plenty of. Coffee grinds around the hives has helped me with ants. Great. I've got tons of those. Good tip. Let's see here. So this person has a new hive, 2 months old, laying tons of drone cells. Should I squish her and requeen? I've already squished the drone cells, and she's rebuilt even more. The question I have for you is, are they also laying tons of worker brood as well? It's not uncommon to see drone in a colony, especially this time of year, and it's 2 months old. I'm not surprised by that, but if they're not raising worker brood, that's a problem. So this person, according to their state apiarist, said hives in full sun will consume honey more so. I'm guessing that has more to do with if they're in full sun, the hive is getting hotter, they're having to fan more, they're consuming more energy, using more energy, therefore consuming more resources. I suspect that that's the theory behind that. What about tracheal mites? Yes, I did not touch on tracheal mites, and here's why. Tracheal mites, through, again, selective breeding of our queens, really are not as much an issue as they were years ago. That's not to say that your bees won't have tracheal mites. That's not to say that you can't lose a colony to tracheal mite, but I didn't see it them as being quite as important as to the hive beetle, which I get tons of questions on, and of course the Varroa, which we all know is sort of the issue in beekeeping. However, tracheal mites, menthol works well. A little bit of Crisco mixed with sugar interrupts the tracheal mite's ability to detect a young bee, and they only like to infest young bees that are 2 to 4 days old. So a little Crisco mixed with sugar on top of your brood chambers interrupts that pathway a bit, and so that's a great way to deal with it. What's the best book for starting bees and treating bees? I really like, there's two books out there, one which is a little, just a skosh outdated, but I know she's working on the next edition. The two that I like are The Beekeeper's Handbook by Diana Semataro and The Backyard Beekeeper by Kim Flottam. Both very good books. Backyard Beekeeper is more recent than The Beekeeper's Handbook. And Backyard Beekeeper also has tons of great recipes in it for soap, candles, lip balms, and of course, my favorite food. Are there any other bugs that look like a hive beetle? Yeah, there are some. Don't look like the picture of a hive beetle. Okay, so there are some. Let me back up to that picture of the hive beetle. There's some others that the ones that I've seen are a little bit longer than this hive beetle, and they tend to have a tannish band coming across the top. I see those quite frequently in a hive that are not hive beetles. There's some that are quite a bit bigger than this. You can sort of get a sense of size. Here's a worker cell. It's basically as long as a worker cell. They also, what's not very evident here, are these they have these clubbed antennae. Let me just, let me do this. Come on. Let me do this. Let me do this. Let me do this. I think I've got, whoop. Come on up. So here you can see the clubbed, you can see those clubbed antennae of the hive beetle right here. And that helps. And of course, this one's a little elongated here, more so than oops. How can I scroll down? Scroll down. Give me my pointer. More so than this one. But that might help identify it as well. Webinar on harvesting honey. Little early for that, but maybe, yep, we're getting there. Queen rearing and banking, please. We're working on it. After freezing the drone frame, do you uncap the cells? They'll take care of all that. Just let it thaw out. Let's see here. Getting there. Let's see if would you need a drone trap? Okay, if you have 2 hive bodies on the hive, would you need a drone trap frame on both hive bodies? So we can come back here to the drone tower. So if this wasn't in this sort of tower configuration and this was just a hive, the question is, would you need a drone frame here and here down in this other brood chamber? Technically speaking, again, the bees want about 10% drone comb. So technically, this is a 10-frame hive. 1 frame in each box would be 10% for the colony. Now, that's in the ideal world, but now you're really getting disruptive and tearing apart the colony. Even this system with the tower, I'd have to tear this whole thing apart. So I just did 1, and I think usually 1 in a hive is sufficient. Is it okay to mix plastic and wood frames in a hive? Yes, as long as the comb, I wouldn't do it until they're drawn out. So in other words, here's all plastic. If these were brand new frames, I would not do 5 wood and 5 plastic. I would try and do all plastic. Once the comb is drawn, like this is drawn comb here on this drone frame, once it's drawn out, they don't care whether it's plastic, wood, it just doesn't make a difference. Can I show? Okay, perfect timing. Here's Joanne asking to see this picture, so here you go. And that's the end of the questions. My gosh, it might just be a record. It's only 7:35. That's crazy. These have gone for like 2 hours and 20 minutes in the past. But so quick, I'm going to go before there's more questions. I want to, here they come. Here comes the flood of the next wave of questions. I want to thank you all for coming. and hopefully we'll get more of these together. I know, like I said, I'll have at least one next month, and I have it set up so that you'll be getting a survey. I haven't done that on the past 2 webinars. The survey will be should be emailed to you, I think, well, maybe it'll come up right after you log out. I'm not sure. If you would take some time just to fill that out, consider that your payment. I don't charge for these, but consider that your payment, filling out that survey, just to help me and to help you, actually. It gives me information about how to improve these and gives me information about what you're looking for, so that I can get the information into your hands the best I can. All right? You all have a lovely evening. And the sun's still shining here, which is amazing since it's rained just about every day this month. So hopefully that weather will continue and our bees will make some honey. Go forth and beekeep. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.